What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? That question didn't come from a book or a preacher or some motivational speaker. It came in the form of a cold Wednesday morning, gray skies sagging over Dayton, Ohio, and a silence so loud it pressed against Harold Jensen's chest. For 42 years, his days had begun with the same rhythm, the clang of his alarm, the hiss of percolating coffee, the slam of his lunchbox against the counter, and then the drive, always the same route, past the church with the broken bell and the diner with the neon sign that buzzed in the winter air. But now, the factory was gone, swallowed not by fire or flood, but by something quieter, colder, automation. The machines kept moving without him. The sensors didn't need a steady hand. The robots didn't ask for raises or take smoke breaks. One day he'd walked in, and his badge didn't buzz green anymore. No warning. No thank you. Just obsolete. That word had sunk deep. Obsolete. A word for broken software or forgotten machinery, not a man with calloused hands and a lifetime of showing up. He stood in his kitchen, hands trembling slightly as he tried to open a jar of peanut butter. His grip wasn't what it used to be. A voice inside whispered, "Maybe none of you is." He turned on the radio to drown it out, but it just made the silence louder. Linda used to hum in the mornings, used to make him oatmeal with raisins, even when he grumbled. Now, her chair in the corner sat empty, the little Afghan still folded on the back. 3 years gone, and he still caught himself talking to her. The coffee was bitter. Maybe he forgot the sugar. Maybe it didn't matter. He pulled on his jacket and stepped outside, the cold slapping him awake. The street was quiet. Kids were at school. Most of the neighbors had moved or passed on. He walked down to the grocery store, ignoring the ache in his knee. He needed milk and maybe something to fill the freezer. As he swiped his card, the machine beeped. Declined. He tried again. Same result. Try credit, the cashier said. He didn't have credit. Not anymore. That's okay, he mumbled, leaving the milk behind and pocketing his pride. Outside, the wind picked up. The world felt like it had moved on without him. Back home, he found a voicemail from his son, Ben. Hey, Dad. Just checking in. Listen, I've been thinking, it might be time to sell the house. Something smaller, easier to manage. Maybe closer to a senior community. Let's talk. The words hit like a slap. Smaller. Easier. Like he was a burden being downsized. He didn't call back. Instead, he sat in the garage, staring at shelves of tools and scraps he hadn't touched in years. In the corner was a dusty cardboard box, sealed with brittle tape. Curiosity or desperation made him open it. Inside, the radio kit. The one he'd started in 1974, before Ben was born, before overtime and mortgage payments and medical bills shoved dreams aside. He lifted the circuit board, the wires, the little instruction book yellowed with age. It smelled like ambition. Like the boy he used to be. He held it for a long time. That night, he couldn't sleep. The TV murmured in the background, news stories about artificial intelligence replacing workers, driverless cars, and automated hospitals. One headline stuck, Elon Musk warns of AI takeover. Harold picked up the remote, curiosity overtaking fatigue. On the screen, Elon sat across from a podcast host, eyes sharp. AI isn't just replacing jobs, Elon said. It's replacing identity. Unless we choose to reinvent ourselves, we become irrelevant. Harold sat forward. That word again, irrelevant. But Elon didn't say it with sadness. He said it like a challenge. Reinvent. Like it was still possible. Harold rewound the clip. Watched it again. And again. Something stirred. Not quite hope. Not yet. But maybe, curiosity. Could an old man reinvent himself? Could someone born in 1957 still matter in a world run by algorithms and teenagers with apps? The next morning, he dusted off the radio kit. Just to see. His fingers fumbled. The soldering iron was rusty. But when he twisted the wire and heard the faintest crackle, something inside him crackled too. It wasn't much. But it was something. He searched for more clips. Elon talking about fear. About how fear is the path to invention. About how the most dangerous lie is, it's too late. Harold wrote that down. It's too late, and then, below it, is it? He didn't tell Ben. He didn't tell anyone. Not yet. But that night, he sat at the kitchen table under the flickering light bulb, wiring circuits and watching old MIT lectures on YouTube, scribbling notes like a college freshman. It felt ridiculous. It felt incredible. He burned his thumb. He swore. He laughed. He didn't feel old. He felt alive. On day 3, he went to the library and borrowed a book on machine learning. The librarian raised an eyebrow but said nothing. On day 4, he signed up for an online class using a fake email because he didn't want anyone to see Jensen 1947 enrolled in Intro to AI for Beginners. On day 5, he fixed the broken toaster in the break room at the senior center and felt like a magician. No one clapped. But he smiled anyway. It wasn't about applause. It was about the fire that had reignited inside. The fire that said, maybe you're not finished. Maybe you were never obsolete. Maybe you just needed to remember what it felt like to build something again. That night, he watched Elon on a panel. Someone asked, "Aren't you afraid of failing?" Elon shrugged. "I fail all the time. That's how I know I'm trying." Harold wrote that down too. Outside, the wind howled. But inside, the house hummed. Wires buzzed. Coffee brewed. The soldering iron glowed. Harold looked at the unfinished radio and whispered, "Let's try this again." He didn't know where it would go. He didn't know if it would work. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't waiting for permission. And that changed everything. He remembered the smell of solder and burnt dust before he remembered his wife's face. That hit him harder than he expected. It was early, too early for the sun, and Harold Jensen sat hunched at the kitchen table, the glow of the small desk lamp casting shadows on his wrinkled hands. In front of him lay the half-gutted radio kit, tiny resistors and wires strewn like memories across the table. His coffee had gone cold. A part of him wanted to laugh. Was this how it all came full circle? Not with applause or gold watches, but with a 68-year-old man squinting at YouTube tutorials, trying to remember what it felt like to be somebody. He rubbed his fingers against each other, feeling the texture of his own skin, rough from years of welding and lifting and turning bolts. These were hands that had built real things, heavy things, things that mattered. And yet, it had been years, decades, since anyone asked him to build anything. The last time someone said, "We need you," Linda was still alive. The thought of her name, even silent in his head, was like a blade under his ribs. Linda Marie Jensen. She wore lavender perfume, loved Johnny Mathis, and made the best cornbread on the block. She used to call him Radio Man, not because he was good at it, but because he never stopped talking about his dream of building one from scratch. That was 1974. He had just turned 17. He'd found the kit at a yard sale. It cost $12, money he earned cleaning out gutters and fixing neighbors' screen doors. He spent hours staring at it, flipping through the manual like it held the secrets of the universe. His father had laughed, "What the hell are you gonna do with that?" And his brother stole a wire cutter from the box, never gave it back. But Linda saw something in it. She asked questions. She stayed up late while he tried to explain frequency and resistance and why the little black chip was the heart of it all. She called it science magic. And then life happened. They got married the next year, right before his number came up for the draft. He didn't see combat, just fixed equipment on a base in California. By the time he got home, Linda was working at the diner and pregnant with Ben. The radio kit was stuffed into a box, then a closet, then the garage. He meant to get back to it. Every year he meant to. But then came the bills, the night shifts, the hospital runs, the rusting cars, the little league games, the mortgage, and eventually, the long quiet days that followed her funeral. That was when the silence started to ache. He sipped his coffee and felt it, grief like a phantom limb, always there, always sore. He hadn't cried when she died. Not really. Not until he tried to cook her chili recipe and burned the onions. That's when the dam broke. Now, the ache had softened, but the loneliness had hardened. Ben had a family of his own, and though he called sometimes, it was always brief. Awkward. Obligatory. Harold couldn't blame him. Their conversations rarely made it past the same script. How's the weather? How's work? You eatin' okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Click. He couldn't remember the last time they talked about something real. Maybe when Ben was 12 and broke the window with a baseball and cried because he thought he'd be kicked out. Harold hadn't yelled. He patched the glass and told Ben, "You're not what you break, you're what you fix." It was probably the best thing he ever said as a father. And maybe the last time he sounded wise. Now the house was full of ghosts. Not the haunting kind, but the slow, creeping kind, memories frozen in drawers, faded photos in cracked frames, a coat of hers still hanging by the door because he couldn't stand the emptiness of that hook. In the living room was the recliner she used to nap in. He couldn't sit in it. Not even now. But the radio, this radio, had awoken something he thought long dead. Not just nostalgia. Purpose. It was like turning the key in a long idle truck and feeling the engine cough, then rumble back to life. The YouTube tutorials were clunky, but they made sense. Some part of his brain, buried under years of rust and repetition, still knew how to follow a circuit, still knew how to listen for the right buzz, the right crackle. Last night he managed to make a diode light blink. It blinked. Stupid, maybe, but it blinked. And it felt like a fist pump moment. He didn't tell anyone. Who would he tell? The guy at the gas station who barely looked up from his phone. The mail lady who smiled but never stopped walking. His world had gotten small. The walls, the television, the recliner he wouldn't sit in, and now this table with wires that curled like veins. He opened a notebook and started sketching. He hadn't drawn anything in decades. But it came back. The way dreams sometimes do. He drew a basic receiver circuit. Then he jotted down a quote, "AI isn't replacing labor. It's replacing identity." He circled it 3 times. It wasn't just Elon's voice that hit him, it was the way he said it. Like someone daring you to disagree. Like someone throwing you a rope, not a warning. What if it was true? What if the real danger wasn't being left behind, it was choosing to stay behind? He scratched out another note, "You're not too old. You're just unfinished." He didn't know where that came from, but it sounded like something Linda would have said. He stood up, bones creaking, and walked out to the garage. The place was dusty, cluttered, but familiar. Tools on pegboards, a cracked leather work stool, a shelf of old Popular Mechanics magazines. He pulled one down, June 1982. On the cover, "The Future of Personal Computers." He flipped through, smiling at the old predictions. Flying cars by 1990. Colonies on Mars. But there was something else, a 2-page spread about senior engineers and how retirees were shaping early tech companies with their experience. He stared at it. They were in their 60s. They had white hair. They were smiling. Somewhere along the way, that idea got lost. That elders build things. Not just memories. But futures. Now the future belonged to 20-somethings with hoodies and stock options. The rest of them were supposed to fade. Play golf. Watch game shows. Die quietly. He grunted and started clearing off the workbench. If Elon was right, and he had to believe he was, then the only way to beat irrelevance was to build. Not talk. Not dream. Build. He found an old toolbox under the bench. Inside were pliers, wire strippers, a tiny Phillips screwdriver. It felt like meeting old friends. He grabbed a cloth and began cleaning them. Every swipe of the rag felt like rewinding time. He didn't want to be young again. That wasn't it. He wanted to be useful again. The difference mattered. That night, he skipped the news and instead watched a 2-hour talk Elon gave on neural networks. He didn't understand half of it. But he understood the fire behind it. The belief that no one is done until they say they are. At one point, Elon said, most people live by permission. The bold live by decisions. Harold rewound that 5 times. Live by decisions. He wrote it down. He didn't know what his next decision would be. But he knew it wouldn't be to sit and wait for the end. He turned off the TV. Looked at the unfinished radio. And decided he wasn't finished either. The morning came gray and heavy, not with rain but with that invisible weight Harold had begun to recognize in his bones, the kind that made getting out of bed feel like an argument with gravity. He stared at the ceiling for longer than he cared to admit, listening for some reason to get up. There were no factory whistles now, no reason to rush, no one waiting. He finally rose and shuffled to the bathroom, catching a glimpse of himself in the mirror. The face that stared back wasn't unfamiliar, just unexpected: white stubble, creased cheeks, and those tired blue eyes that still searched for a purpose. He thought of the half-finished radio again, the little red wire that refused to sit right, the solder that bubbled instead of bonding, and for a moment he considered going back to the table and trying again. But then his knee ached when he stepped down and reminded him he was not the man who used to kneel under trucks for hours or hoist beams into place without thinking twice. He made coffee, no sugar, no cream, no Linda to correct him. The silence in the house was not new, but today it felt sharper, like walking barefoot on cold tile. He turned on the television, hoping for a voice, any voice, to push the quiet back into the corners. The news was a parade of headlines he didn't understand: AI-piloted cargo ships docking in Los Angeles, a new generative video tool that could make movies without actors, automated surgeries in Chicago hospitals, and an announcement from a major retail chain that they'd replaced over 5,000 jobs with intelligent kiosks. The anchors smiled as if it were progress. Harold stared at the screen, his hand tightening around the coffee mug. Progress, he thought bitterly, meant a world that didn't need him. Not just him, people like him. People who knew how to fix things with their hands, who memorized the sounds of engines, who measured success in work done and not in likes or shares or efficiency scores. Somewhere along the way, the skills that had made him valuable had become quaint. Ben had tried to explain it once. It's just how things are evolving, Dad. You can't take it personally. But how else was he supposed to take it? You give 4 decades of your life to something, and then it evolves past you. He turned off the television, the silence somehow worse now that it had been broken. He decided to go for a walk, stretch the ache out of his joints, breathe something that didn't come from a vent. He bundled into his coat, slipped on his old boots, and stepped into the chill. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the whir of delivery drones overhead and the distant bark of a dog. Most of the houses were the same, but they felt different now: curtains drawn, lawns overgrown, a kind of settled neglect hanging over everything. He passed the small senior center tucked between a shuttered pharmacy and a nail salon. A poster taped to the glass door caught his eye. Tech for seniors, learn the basics of AI and smart living. He stared at it for a long moment, then pushed the door open, the bell above tinkling weakly. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A young woman with short pink hair and thick glasses looked up from her tablet and smiled. "Hi there. Here for the tech class." Harold hesitated. "Maybe. I saw the sign." She motioned toward the room on the left. "They just started. You can pop in." He nodded stiffly and followed the hallway to the classroom, where about a dozen seniors were sitting in plastic chairs, their attention half held by a young instructor with a laptop. The instructor was talking fast, gesturing at a screen filled with colorful diagrams. "So basically, machine learning allows the computer to analyze data and make predictions based on that data. Like, say you have pictures of cats and dogs, it learns the patterns and then can tell them apart." A hand went up. An elderly woman asked, "But how does it know the difference?" The instructor smiled, but it was the kind of smile that says, "This will take too long to explain." He clicked to another slide. "It's all in the training data. It's kind of like how you recognize your friends. You've seen them enough, so the AI does the same. Just faster." Harold sat in the back, feeling the sting of every unfamiliar word. Neural networks, algorithms, data sets, predictive models, it all sounded like a foreign language spoken too fast. The instructor moved on to smart home devices, talking about thermostats that learned your schedule, refrigerators that could order milk, even toilets that monitored your health. Some people chuckled. Harold felt the blood leave his hands. The world he grew up in, the one where you turned the knob, flipped the switch, tightened the bolt, was being replaced by invisible thinking. Machines that didn't just do, but decided. And where did that leave him? After the session, he lingered near the coffee machine, staring into the styrofoam cup he held, unsure if he felt defeated or just exposed. The instructor approached. "Hey there, you sat in the back, right? What did you think?" Harold looked up. "Honestly? It made me feel like I'd already missed the train." The instructor laughed, but not unkindly. "Yeah, it's a lot to take in. But it's never too late to learn. AI's going to be a part of everything soon, might as well get comfortable with it." Harold forced a smile. Comfortable felt like the wrong word. He thanked the man and left, the cold air outside shocking against his face. As he walked home, the city around him seemed unfamiliar in the worst way. He passed a bus stop where a holographic ad showed a young woman coding in virtual reality, grinning as the words, "Create the future," shimmered across the screen. Create the future. What future had he ever created? He'd followed the rules, showed up on time, paid his taxes, built a life. But now the world didn't seem to care about any of that. It cared about innovation and disruption and scaling. He was none of those things. He reached his front door and paused. The house felt smaller, more fragile. Inside, he kicked off his boots and stood there, unsure of what to do next. He wanted to pick up the radio project, but doubt pressed down like a lead blanket. Why was he even doing it? To prove something? To who? Himself? His son? The world? Did any of them care? The worst part wasn't the obsolescence. It was the irrelevance. People used to depend on him. Linda. Ben. The factory. Even the church committee that asked him to fix the broken heater every winter. Now, no one asked. And he wasn't sure if that meant he was free or just forgotten. He sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on knees, and stared at the blank television. The world had gone smart. Phones, cars, homes, even refrigerators had more intelligence than the man who stocked them. For the first time, he felt the full truth of what Elon had said. AI wasn't just replacing work, it was replacing identity. And the more the world ran on automation, the more it seemed to forget the people who once made it run. But somewhere beneath the weight of that realization, a flicker sparked. Not pride. Not anger. But something quieter, resistance. If the world wasn't going to remember him, maybe he'd have to remind it. Not by yelling. Not by begging. But by building. The radio on the table sat like a question mark, unfinished and humming with possibility. He stood up slowly and walked over to it. Picked up the wire. Took a deep breath. And soldered the next connection. Harold didn't expect the video to hit him the way it did. It was just a link buried inside a tech blog he found while researching signal frequencies, a site he never would have stumbled across a week ago, back when his idea of using the internet meant checking the weather or ordering cheap AA batteries. The headline read, "What Elon Musk just said about AI should terrify you." Normally, Harold hated those kinds of titles, overblown, clickbait nonsense designed to stir up fear or sell ads, but something about it stuck. Maybe it was the word terrify. He clicked anyway. The video opened with Elon seated in a gray leather chair, speaking on a dim stage at some high-profile tech conference. The camera was tight on his face, no cuts, no music, just his voice, steady and serious. "We are rapidly approaching a moment," he said, "when artificial intelligence will be able to outthink, outlearn, and outperform human beings in nearly every measurable way." Harold leaned in slightly. Elon went on, "That doesn't mean it will destroy us. But it does mean we'll have to confront a truth: value will no longer come from physical labor or even intellectual skill, but from imagination, from adaptability, from human emotion. AI can simulate it, but it can't live it. Not yet." The audience was silent. Elon paused, as if letting it sink in. "The danger isn't that AI becomes smarter than us," he continued, "the danger is that we stop trying because we believe it already has." Harold stared at the screen. "We stop trying," that line hit like a wrench to the chest. He wasn't a philosopher. He wasn't a scientist. But he understood what Elon meant. The world was changing so fast that most people were stepping off the ride, thinking they'd already missed their chance to matter. But what if that wasn't true? What if the only people being left behind were the ones who chose to stop moving? That night, Harold stayed up reading. He read until his eyes burned, until his neck ached from craning at the laptop, until he forgot to eat. Not just about AI, but about adaptation, about resilience, about the second half of life. He discovered stories of people who had reinvented themselves after 60, coders, writers, inventors, even a 72-year-old woman who'd built a home energy grid in her garage after reading about Tesla batteries. The world hadn't given her permission. She just did it. That was the word that kept showing up, permission. Elon had used it, too, in another clip Harold found. A grainy recording from an old podcast. Most people think they need permission to do great things. But the people who actually change the world, they give themselves permission. They just start. Harold stood in his kitchen, letting that echo in the air. They just start. He glanced at the radio kit. It wasn't just a project now. It was a symbol. A flag. A dare. He picked up his notebook and started writing, not technical notes this time, but ideas. Bold ones. Crazy ones. Can I turn this radio into something new? Could I build a basic AI that works with radio frequencies? Is there a way to teach older adults how to understand this stuff? The questions came fast, clumsy but alive. Then he wrote a single line, all caps, underlined 3 times, "What if this isn't about the radio?" He sat back. Breathed. The truth hit him like thunder. This wasn't about building a radio. This was about rebuilding himself. Reclaiming relevance. Not through bitterness. Not through nostalgia. But through creation. He wasn't trying to return to who he used to be. He was trying to become someone new. Someone who didn't wait for someone else to tell him what he could do. And so he started building something else, something with the radio. A hybrid idea. A simple receiver, yes, but connected to a small processor chip he ordered online, one that could process data and send signals to his laptop. He didn't have a full plan. But the vision was forming, a device that scanned public frequencies, pulled in open signals, and logged them. For what purpose? He didn't know yet. Maybe it could be trained to look for patterns. Maybe he could run simple AI software to identify certain voice tones, language, keywords. Maybe, just maybe, it could help people feel less alone by picking up broadcasts others ignored. It was a stretch. Probably too ambitious. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel old. He felt curious. He felt useful. He went to bed with parts spread across his work table and a million questions racing through his head. The next morning, he walked to the local library and checked out more books, on programming, basic AI, even one titled Neural Networks for Non-Techies. The librarian, an older man named Dennis, raised an eyebrow. "Going back to school, Harold?" Harold gave a small smile. "Something like that." That afternoon, he watched another Elon interview. This one was different, less technical, more personal. Elon was asked, "What keeps you going when things get hard?" He paused. Then said, "I believe in the importance of the mission more than I believe in comfort." That line stuck. The mission over comfort. Harold copied it into his notebook. What was his mission? To matter. To finish something. To prove to Ben, and maybe to himself, that he wasn't done. All of it. None of it. Something deeper, maybe. To help others like him find a spark. A way in. A way forward. That night he started drafting an idea, a blog. Nothing fancy. Just a place to document what he was learning. To show the process. The mistakes. The breakthroughs. He called it Late Bloom Tech. He chuckled at the name but kept it. It felt honest. Raw. He typed the first post with 2 fingers, slow but steady. "I'm 68. I got laid off. I thought I was finished." Then I watched Elon Musk talk about AI, and something woke up in me. I'm not a genius. I'm not rich. I'm not fast. But I'm here. Learning. Building. One wire, one code line at a time. This blog isn't about being impressive. It's about being in progress. He hit publish. Then he sat back, breathing hard, heart pounding like he'd just run a mile. No one would probably read it. But that wasn't the point. The point was, he'd stepped into the arena. He'd given himself permission. And that felt like winning. The next day, he got an email. Just one. From someone named Laura W. She wrote, "I'm 74. Widowed. Used to work in avionics. Gave it up in '95. I thought I was the only one who missed building things. Your blog gave me goosebumps. I'm dusting off my soldering iron. Thank you." Harold stared at the screen. Smiled. Then whispered, "Well, damn. One person. That was all it took." He went back to the radio. The signal was still rough. The processor wasn't behaving. But he wasn't discouraged. He was lit up. And in the background, Elon's voice echoed in his mind, "The bold live by decisions." Harold Jensen had made his. The sound was faint, but it was real. A single burst of static, then a voice, choppy, distant, like it was fighting through a snowstorm from 50 years ago. Harold froze, his fingers hovering above the small processor board as if afraid the movement would scare the signal away. He adjusted the tuning knob by a hair, then again, ever so gently. The voice came clearer, still broken but unmistakably human. Reporting clear skies across the eastern, and then it was gone. Gone, but not forgotten. Because that 1 second, that tiny sliver of reception from a crude, hand-built system running out of a suburban garage in Dayton, Ohio, felt like the future knocking on his door. Not the flying car future. Not the sterile AI future from movies. But his future. One he was building one resistor at a time. He sat back in his chair, wiped his hands on his jeans, and exhaled the kind of breath that carries decades. There was no applause. No blinking success sign. Just a 68-year-old man grinning in his garage at a blinking green LED and a whisper from the airwaves. But that whisper meant everything. It meant the components were talking. It meant the receiver could pick up signals. It meant he wasn't crazy. And it meant something more, he could do this. He could learn. He could build. He could create. Not despite his age. Maybe even because of it. He looked at the signal log on his laptop. Just raw time stamps and incomplete frequency pings for now, but it was a start. He had no idea what he was going to do with it. But he didn't need to know yet. The important part was that it was working. For the first time in years, Harold didn't feel like a man looking backward. He felt like a man standing at the edge of something new, looking forward. That afternoon, he updated the blog. He posted a photo of the receiver, a short video clip of the blinking light, and wrote, "The radio spoke today." It was brief, it was choppy, but it was mine. Built with shaking hands and a stubborn heart. This isn't just about circuits. It's about building something after the world tells you you're finished. It's about telling that voice in your head to sit down while you stand up. He closed the laptop, went inside, and made himself a grilled cheese sandwich, burned the edges, just the way Linda used to. That evening, he got 6 new emails. 6. All from strangers. One from a retired electrician in Arizona who said he used to tinker with ham radios in the 80s and was now inspired to try again. One from a 71-year-old former librarian in Kansas who said she'd just ordered her first Arduino kit because of him. And one that made him sit down and stare, an email from a woman named Susan, who wrote, "My father was an engineer. He died last year. When I read your post, I felt like I was hearing his voice again. Thank you for reminding me that the people who build things don't vanish, they just go quiet until the world remembers to listen." Harold read that one 3 times. Then he cried. Not because he was sad. Because he finally knew, he was being heard. He wasn't shouting into the void. He was reaching people. Not thousands. Not millions. But enough. That night, he didn't watch the news. He didn't worry about what AI might take away next. He kept soldering, kept coding, kept tweaking. He didn't feel like an old man chasing relevance anymore. He felt like a young man rediscovering rebellion. A rebellion not against youth or change, but against invisibility. Over the next week, he kept at it. Some nights went long. Some wires burned out. One time he accidentally shorted a chip and nearly fried the whole board. But he kept going. Every mistake was a lesson. Every setback was proof he was still doing. He watched more Elon talks, not because he needed a hero, but because Musk's voice, confident, urgent, a little strange, reminded him to think bigger. In one clip, Elon said, "People underestimate what they can build in a year and overestimate what they can build in a week. But the people who build every day, they change the world." Harold wrote that down and taped it to the garage wall. Every day, build something. Every day, learn something. Every day, matter. One morning, his blog was mentioned on a local Facebook group for retired tradesmen. That night, he got 42 new views. Then 100. Then someone shared it on Reddit, and traffic spiked. The next day, a local reporter called and asked if she could come do a story. He nearly said no. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to make. But then he thought of the others, the ones who were still sitting in their chairs, staring at dusty garages, wondering if they could still matter. And he said yes. The reporter came with a cameraman, both younger than his youngest tool. She was kind, professional, and didn't treat him like a novelty. She asked why he started the project. He said, because I realized no one's going to hand you purpose. You have to go out and build it. The story aired 2 nights later. A 3-minute clip on the local news. They called him the late blooming tinkerer. He laughed at that. The next morning, the blog crashed from traffic. Hundreds of emails poured in. Retirees, tinkerers, former engineers, artists, even a high school robotics teacher who wanted to share his blog with his class. People weren't just reading, they were relating. Harold started getting requests for advice. Simple ones: what soldering iron do you use? Where did you learn this stuff? Can I really learn at 70? His answers were just as simple: one that still works. YouTube and mistakes. Yes. He added a resources page to the blog. Posted links. Started uploading videos of his progress. His hands shook sometimes. His voice cracked. But it didn't matter. People listened. Then came the letter from Ben. Not an email. Not a voicemail. A letter. Handwritten. The envelope came on a Thursday. He recognized the handwriting but couldn't place it until he opened it and read, "Dad, I saw the news story. I don't know why I was surprised. You always did make things work. Even when I thought they couldn't. I've been thinking a lot about what I want my kids to remember about me. About you. I think it's time we talked." Harold sat down slowly. The words blurred. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that. Not praise. Not forgiveness. Just connection. The fire was spreading. What started as a flicker in his garage had become something more. Not fame. Not glory. But proof. Proof that relevance isn't assigned, it's created. That age isn't a disqualifier, it's a multiplier of perspective, patience, grit. The next day, Harold looked at the blinking receiver, now logging thousands of signals per day, each one stored, time-stamped, and tagged. He wasn't sure what it would become. Maybe it would evolve into a teaching tool. Maybe a network. Maybe something entirely unexpected. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He was awake. And somewhere, echoing in the back of his mind, was Elon's voice: "The future belongs to the bold." Harold Jensen, 68 years old, gray hair, arthritis, no degree, and a garage full of scrap, was bold. Not because he had all the answers. But because he showed up. Because he gave himself permission to begin. And that spark. It was catching fire. The first time someone called him a pioneer, Harold laughed so hard he nearly choked on his coffee, but the message had been sincere, sent by a man in Alaska who said Harold's blog had given him the courage to take apart his grandson's broken drone and try rebuilding it with salvaged parts from an old VHS player. "Just like the old days," the man wrote, "when people fixed things instead of throwing them away." Harold reread that line 3 times before he realized what had been tugging at him. For weeks, not the projects, not the blog, not the emails or the news clip or even Ben's letter, it was the question beneath it all, the one no one ever asked out loud, the one hidden beneath every headline about AI and automation and the future, a question that echoed not in fear but in silence: what happens to the ones who still want to contribute but aren't being asked anymore? It wasn't a technological problem, it was a human one, because the world wasn't cruel. It was fast, too optimized, too streamlined, and in its rush to evolve it had stopped looking back, stopped noticing the ones who had built the very foundations it now ran on, the men and women whose hands had wired the first telegraphs, whose minds had solved problems without Google, whose stubbornness had kept factories running during blackouts and blizzards and bankruptcies, and somewhere along the way, they had been set aside, patted on the back, given retirement parties, handed plaques, and silently moved out of the way, but no one ever stopped to ask if they were finished, and Harold realized, sitting at his workbench with wires coiled like sleeping snakes and his AI logging software open on the screen, that he had never been asked, not once since the day he was laid off, "What do you still want to build?" The world had assumed that age meant conclusion, but he hadn't reached a conclusion, he had just been paused, shelved, archived, like an old file labeled "too late," but that file was open now, and its contents were very much alive. He could feel it every time he pressed a soldering iron to a board and smelled the sweet burn of flux, every time he got an email from someone saying, "Me too," every time he ran his code and watched the signals pour in, whispering data from all over the country. Voices, emergency beacons, CB truckers, low-band chatter, encrypted pings from government frequencies, fragments of forgotten humanity crisscrossing the air like ghosts of analog past, and his little device caught them all, listened to what no one else could hear, like him, perhaps, a machine made to tune into what the world forgot, and that was when it hit him, not as a thought but as a mission statement. What if AI could be used to help people feel heard? Not just in the way customer service chatbots responded with fake empathy, but really heard, to find those faint signals, those subtle transmissions, those metaphorical broadcasts that aging people sent out every day in the form of questions, fears, attempts to contribute, only to be ignored by systems optimized for youth and speed, and maybe, just maybe, Harold's project could be more than just a tool. It could be a metaphor with utility, something that didn't just receive signals, but translated them into something useful, actionable, maybe even beautiful. And he remembered Elon Musk's phrase from one of the older interviews, "If you're not building a bridge, you're building a wall," and Harold realized he was building a bridge. Not just between technology and memory, but between generations, between relevance and regret, between what was and what could still be, and he suddenly wished Ben were there, not just because of the letter, not just because the silence between them had started to soften, but because Ben had always understood systems better than people, and maybe now they could understand both together. Father and son not trying to fix the past but trying to invent a future that made space for both of them. He stared at his computer screen for a long moment, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat, and he began to type a message, not to Ben this time, but to the email list he'd gathered through his blog, people like him, scattered across the country. Each with their own unfinished story, each wondering if they still mattered, and he wrote, "I've been thinking about something. What if we created a network, a collective of people who still want to build, still want to learn, who aren't ready to be invisible yet? We don't need anyone's permission. We just need each other. I'll start. Every week I'll share my latest project file, what I'm learning, what broke, what worked, and I'll feature one of yours. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be in motion. Who's in?" He hit send, leaned back, and waited, not for validation but for ignition, and within an hour responses started coming in, dozens of them, then hundreds over the next 3 days, photos of garage workbenches, screenshots of old design plans, voice messages from people too excited to type, a woman in Minnesota who was building a hydroponic garden using hacked thermostats, a retired mechanic in Georgia creating a remote-controlled snowplow from his grandkid's abandoned Power Wheels truck, a 76-year-old man in Oregon who had used ChatGPT to help him write the business plan for a custom tool design company aimed at people with arthritis, and all of it, the energy, the creativity, the fire, was proof that the spark had never died. It had just been buried under dust and doubt and the world's assumption that growth had an age limit, and Harold knew then that he had found something bigger than any invention. He had found a tribe, a signal in the noise, and every night when he closed his laptop, exhausted but alive, he whispered to himself, "This is what no one asked. What if we're just getting started?" And he thought about the kids in Silicon Valley, about the venture capitalists and the TikTok engineers and the university labs full of glowing screens and faster-than-human code, and he felt no jealousy, only a strange kind of kinship, because while they were building the future with speed, his people were building it with intention, and maybe the two didn't have to compete, maybe they could complete each other, and maybe, just maybe, the future wasn't a place to fear or envy but a place to walk into, hand in hand with the past, building together, one humble invention at a time. It started with a joke. Harold called it the Garage Summit, in a late-night blog post, half laughing at the idea that a bunch of retired mechanics, hobbyists, and grandparent engineers could have their own kind of tech conference, not in some fancy auditorium or Silicon Valley event space but right where most of them did their best work. In basements and backyard sheds and two-car garages that smelled like motor oil, WD-40, and 20-year-old ambition. He hadn't expected anyone to take it seriously, but by the next morning, he'd received 17 replies from people who wanted to help make it real, and one man from Detroit even offered to drive his RV across the country if Harold needed a mobile command center. Harold stared at the screen, blinking slowly, realizing that the thing he had imagined in a haze of late night optimism was starting to crystallize into something real, something people were now counting on, and once again, the question returned, who says we can't? That simple defiance became the fuel, and within a week he'd created a Google form for participants, calling it, the first annual Garage Summit, Building the Future After 60, and the tagline under the title read, "We're not done. We're just getting started." The form asked a few simple questions. Name, location, what are you working on, and why do you want to be part of this? And Harold wasn't prepared for what came back, not the volume, not the vulnerability, not the unshakable hope that poured through the screen. People sent photos of rusted tool benches and scribbled blueprints, circuit boards taped to cardboard, drone prototypes made out of coat hangers, solar panels hacked from broken calculators. But more than that, they sent stories, raw and beautiful, stories of being laid off too early, of children who didn't understand their skills, of neighbors who assumed they were done, of days spent in silence wondering if the fire inside was a mistake, until Harold's blog had reminded them that wanting to matter wasn't a weakness, it was the most human instinct of all, and suddenly he saw it. Not a gathering of has-beens, but a convergence of possibility, a different kind of tech culture, not based on youth or speed but on depth, on perseverance, on the long arc of curiosity that had never quite burned out, and so he picked a date 6 weeks out and titled the announcement, Garage Summit, The Revival, and sent it out to the now 100-strong email list. "We'll meet on Zoom, for now," he wrote, "but we'll meet like it matters. Bring your coffee, your sketches, your busted projects and bright ideas. Bring your stories. No resumes. No credentials. Just people who still want to build." And when the day came, Harold sat in front of his laptop wearing a collared shirt for the first time in months, hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the webcam, uncertain whether anyone would show up, whether the signal would hold, whether the whole idea was just too big for an old man in a garage with a blinking receiver and a crazy dream. And then the screen filled. One face, then 3, then 10, then dozens, all stacked in little boxes, men and women with silver hair, baseball caps, glasses sliding down noses, some with shelves of tools behind them, some in spare bedrooms. One woman joined from the front seat of a parked car because it was the only quiet place she could find, and they smiled, waved, laughed nervously, and Harold, with a deep breath that felt like exhaling 20 years of doubt, welcomed them in. "Thank you for being here," he said, "not because you have something to prove, but because you still have something to give." And then he shared his screen and walked them through his radio AI prototype, his learning curve, his mistakes, his breakthroughs, and as he spoke, the chat box filled with encouragement, questions, ideas. Someone even wrote, "This is the most I've felt alive in years," and when Harold finished, he opened the floor, and one by one, they shared. The man from Detroit showed off his homemade robotic arm for holding tools for people with tremors. A woman from New Hampshire demoed her analog smart clock that gave reminders without screens for people with dementia. A former NASA engineer quietly admitted he'd been designing low-cost wheelchair accessories after his own mobility had declined, and the most incredible thing happened. No one tried to outshine anyone. No one dominated the call or name-dropped credentials or tried to sell a product. Instead, there was respect, there was listening, there was belonging, like they all knew they were part of something that hadn't existed before, something they had built together. And at the end of the call, Harold said, "This isn't just a summit. This is a movement," and the chat box lit up with yes, with fire emojis, with the word, "finally." And that night, Harold didn't go back to his workbench. He sat quietly in the kitchen, sipping tea, staring out the window at the night sky, and he let himself feel it, the full weight and warmth of what had happened. He wasn't just a man in a garage anymore, he was a catalyst, not because he was brilliant or rich or famous, but because he had simply said yes to the fire that refused to die, and others had seen that flame and remembered their own, and it was spreading now, one garage, one living room, one late-night Google search at a time, a rebellion not of rage but of relevance, a revival of the maker spirit buried under the noise of convenience, and he thought of something Elon had said once during a podcast. The people who shape the future are often the ones who never believed they were too late to try, and Harold smiled, because he knew, that was them, the quiet few who didn't want to be famous or fast or flawless, they just wanted to keep building, because building was life, and the next morning, the Garage Summit website was born, built by one of the attendees who had been a programmer back in the 90s and wanted to contribute. It was simple, clean, beautiful, profiles of members, photos of their projects, a calendar of future Zoom calls, even a message board where people could ask for help or offer ideas, and Harold's favorite part was the tagline at the top, chosen by the group, still inventing, 2 words that said everything, and by the end of the month, they had over 1,200 members, some active, some just watching, but all curious, all awake, all tuning into a signal that had always been there, just waiting for someone to listen. The knock came at 3:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of time when the world outside was quiet, when deliveries had already come and gone and the neighborhood settled into the dull rhythm of late afternoon. Harold was hunched over his workbench, running a diagnostic on the AI signal parser, half watching a Garage Summit replay on his second monitor when the sound startled him, sharp and intentional, not the aimless rattle of a package drop or the polite double tap of a neighbor. He stood, wiped his hands instinctively on his jeans, and walked to the front door with a flicker of curiosity and something he hadn't felt in years, anticipation. He opened the door slowly and there stood a man in a dark blue jacket, mid-30s, square jaw, clean haircut, holding an envelope under one arm and a small box under the other. "Mr. Harold Jensen?" the man asked, polite but firm. Harold nodded, cautious but calm. "Yes," he said, "that's me." The man smiled. "I'm with XPRIZE Innovation Community," he said, as if that were supposed to explain everything, and for a second, Harold's brain did the shuffle between suspicion and interest, trying to place the name, and then it hit him, XPRIZE, the global innovation organization that funded moonshot ideas. Elon Musk had donated to them, talked about them often, funded challenges through them, wild futuristic projects like carbon capture, space tech, learning tools for underserved populations, and now one of their people was standing on his porch, in Dayton, looking like he'd stepped out of a TED Talk. The man continued, "We've been following the Garage Summit project. Your name kept coming up. We'd like to talk." Harold blinked, stepping aside, still trying to catch up to the moment. "Come in," he said slowly, leading the man through the modest living room and into the garage, now a controlled chaos of wires, notes, printed code, and smell of solder that never really left. The man looked around with genuine curiosity, eyes moving from the blinking receiver to the half-disassembled drone to the whiteboard with "AI can amplify purpose" scrawled across the top in thick marker. "You've built quite a thing here," the man said, setting the envelope and box on the corner of the workbench, "not just the device. The movement. We've never seen anything like it. Late-life innovation communities, self-organized, cross-disciplinary, growing organically with zero funding or traditional infrastructure. It's unprecedented." Harold folded his arms, unsure what to say, unsure if this was a compliment, a setup, or some kind of pitch, and he asked. The man smiled again, "And we want to help you take it further. We're launching a new challenge next year, focused on intergenerational innovation, tech projects that link the experience of older creators with the speed and tools of younger ones. We think Garage Summit could be the pilot case." Harold tilted his head. "A case?" he asked, "or a partner?" The man laughed softly. "Both, if you want." He opened the envelope and pulled out a single-page letter, sleek, branded, with Harold's name typed at the top. "This is an invitation," he said, "to present at our upcoming Future Frontiers Forum in San Francisco. One of the keynote blocks. We want you to talk about how this started. What it means. Why it matters. We'll cover travel, lodging, everything. You'd be speaking alongside people like Vint Cerf, Susan Wojcicki, and," the man hesitated, "and Elon." Harold's chest tightened, not with fear but with something harder to name, something between disbelief and recognition. The name didn't strike him as celebrity anymore, not after everything. It struck him as catalyst, the voice that had lit the first fire inside him when everything else felt cold, and now, somehow, impossibly, the signal had circled back around. Elon will be there? Harold asked, not hiding his awe. The man nodded. He specifically asked to be briefed on your project. Harold laughed once, short and disbelieving. That's not real, he muttered, but the man said nothing, just pointed to the box. We also wanted you to have this, he said, sliding it over. Harold opened it slowly, revealing a sleek black plaque, laser-etched, clean and weighty, and on it read, to Harold Jensen, whose signal broke through the noise. X Prize. He stared at it for a long moment, then cleared his throat, the emotion thick in his chest. I'm not a keynote kind of guy, he said finally, but even as he said it, he could feel the edges of the old story starting to peel away, the story that said he was too late, too old, too outside the machine to be heard in rooms like that, but now the rooms were coming to him, because of what he had built, because he had said yes to one whisper of a signal. You don't have to be, the man said gently, you just have to show up. And that sounded familiar, eerily close to something Elon had once said in a talk Harold watched at 2 a.m., most of life is just showing up with your brain still turned on, and now Harold was being asked to show up, for real, in front of people with titles and spotlights and $1 million stage, and he didn't know if he could give them what they expected, but maybe that was the point. To be the unexpected one, the reminder that genius isn't always young, that innovation doesn't expire, that relevance isn't issued like a driver's license, it's claimed. What happens after that? Harold asked, still staring at the plaque, still letting the moment take shape in his chest. The man leaned against the garage wall, arms crossed. After that? Whatever you want. We've got funding. We've got teams. If you want to turn Garage Summit into a global model, we'll back it. If you want to develop your device into a product, we've got resources. If you want to mentor others, build a legacy lab, write a book, hell, start a documentary, we're ready. Harold chuckled. You assume I want all that. The man nodded. We assume you've earned the right to choose, and that stuck with Harold, long after the man left, long after the invitation letter was tucked into a drawer and the plaque set on the shelf, long into the night as he sat at his bench, staring at the green lights blinking on his receiver, that phrase, the right to choose. Because that was it, wasn't it, the thing that aging often steals without anyone noticing, the quiet loss of options, the shrinking of futures, the slow erosion of the question what's next? Replaced with what now? But here he was, almost 70, and for the first time in years, he had more doors open than he knew what to do with, and instead of being afraid, he felt a rush of something else. Readiness, not to be the hero, not to prove himself, but to take his place at the table, not because he was given a seat but because he had built the damn table out of spare parts and faith. The Garage Summit wasn't just a community anymore, it was a signal tower, a beacon, a proof of concept for a generation that had been told to sit quietly in the back row while the future marched on without them. And now Harold had been invited to walk straight into the center of it, spotlight or not. You've earned the right to choose, he repeated softly to himself, then opened a fresh notebook page, scribbled the words, San Francisco, underlined it, and wrote, talk about the first signal, because that's where it always started, not with applause, not with titles, but with a sound that said keep going, even when no one else believed you could. The auditorium smelled like money and ambition and freshly brewed coffee, not like oil and wire like his garage, not like old paper and wooden shelves like the library he used to take Ben to when he was little, but like brushed steel and artificial air and hidden lighting rigs pulsing with timed choreography that made everything feel more important than it probably was. Harold stood backstage, heart rattling against his ribs, wondering if the sport coat they'd lent him made him look like a man pretending to be someone else or someone finally remembering who he'd always been. The screen beyond the curtain showed a countdown timer, 37 seconds, voices in headsets murmured stage directions and camera angles. A woman handed him a small wireless mic and clipped it to his collar with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. You're up after the highlight reel, she said gently, take your time. Just be you, and that last part hit him sideways, just be you, because for so long he hadn't known who that even was. The world had turned him into a former engineer, a former father, a man formerly known for something no one remembered, but now. Now people wanted him to be Harold, not the old Harold, but the one with the blinking green light and the stubborn spark, the one who dared to start again when everyone else had stopped asking. On the giant screen above the stage, a video played showing a montage of the garage summit, faces in home workshops, hands shaping wood and wire, snippets of projects born in silence and rebuilt in the open, voices saying things like, "I thought I was done," and "This made me feel possible again," and there. In the middle of it all, was him, Harold Jensen, sitting in his Dayton garage, explaining signal tracking like it was the most natural thing in the world, and then the reel ended, the music faded, and the announcer's voice said, "Please welcome to the stage Harold Jensen," and the crowd clapped, not politely, not excessively, but warmly, like they meant it, like they knew, and Harold stepped out, squinting slightly into the lights, hands not quite shaking, heart thudding but mind clear. He looked out at rows of faces, students, engineers, journalists, tech moguls, maybe even Elon himself somewhere in the shadows, though he didn't know for sure, and for the first time in his life. Harold Jensen wasn't nervous because he was out of place, he was calm. Because he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "Hi," he began, the mic catching the rasp in his throat, "I'm not a keynote speaker. I'm not a CEO. I'm not here to pitch you an app or a new market segment. I'm here because one night, at 68 years old, I sat in my garage and thought, what if I'm not done yet?" He paused, scanning the room. They were listening, really listening. It wasn't glamorous. It was lonely. "I didn't have funding. I didn't have a plan. I just had a question and a quote." He smiled softly. "The question was, can I still build something that matters?" And the quote, well, it came from a man some of you may know. Mr. Musk once said, "People underestimate what they can build in a year and overestimate what they can build in a day." That line stuck to me like solder. A few chuckles, but mostly silence, focused silence, the kind people rarely give in the digital age. So I built a radio receiver. Crude, barely held together with wire and hope, but it worked. It caught signals, real ones, from far away. And suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. I was part of something. And that something became a blog. And that blog became a spark. And that spark became the Garage Summit. He gestured to the screen behind him, now showing snapshots of projects submitted from around the world, modified walkers, smart cabinets, AI-assisted music boxes made by a retired jazz pianist in Chicago, a low-light indoor garden built by a woman who used to teach biology at a high school in rural Maine. These people, Harold continued, voice warming now, were told their best ideas were behind them. That they were too old to adapt, too slow to matter. And yet, when given space, when given a little light and encouragement, they didn't just adapt. They led. They innovated. Not with flash or scale or IPOs, but with care. With grit. With a lifetime of trial and error. The audience leaned in, a sea of blinking eyes and thoughtful stares. "I used to think the future was something I wasn't invited to," Harold said, "that it belonged to the young. That I was lucky just to watch it happen from the sidelines. But I was wrong. The future isn't a party for the gifted few. It's a workshop with an open door. If you show up, tools in hand, mind still on, there's a place for you." Someone clapped, then more, then it quieted again. "What I've learned, what we've all learned, is that innovation doesn't retire. Creativity doesn't hit a cutoff age. And relevance isn't a privilege reserved for those under 40. Relevance is something you claim. It's something you build." Harold stepped slightly forward, gripping the edge of the podium for a second, grounding himself in the moment. "The reason I'm here isn't because I had a good idea. It's because I acted on it. In the smallest way possible. A resistor. A few lines of code. A question. And if you leave here today with anything, let it be this: start something. Doesn't matter what. Doesn't matter if it fails. What matters is the motion. Because motion is where the magic lives." He paused, exhaled, let the moment breathe. We live in a world obsessed with speed. But what the world forgets is that endurance is just as powerful. That showing up every day, even when no one's clapping, is a radical act. another beat of silence, not awkward but charged. So to the young, listen to the ones who came before you. They've fallen in ways you haven't even imagined yet. And to the old, stop waiting for someone to ask you to dance. You're the music. You always have been. With that, Harold stepped back, heart pounding, eyes shimmering under the heat of the lights, and the applause came. Full and rising, not the empty kind but the deep kind, the standing kind, and for a few seconds he stood there in the echo of it, not as a guest, not as a novelty, but as a voice, not because of fame, not because of noise, but because of signal, and in that moment, he remembered the first blink of green on the radio, the late-night Musk interview, the blog post no one was supposed to read, and how it had all started not with certainty but with the simplest belief, that it was worth trying anyway. And as he walked off stage, someone touched his arm gently and whispered, he was in the back. Elon. He nodded through the whole thing. Harold didn't know what to say, didn't know if that was real or staged or coincidence, but it didn't matter anymore, because what mattered had already happened. The fire had spread, the walls had come down, and somewhere out there, in some forgotten garage, another person was picking up a screwdriver for the first time in decades, whispering to themselves, what if I'm not done? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The phone rang just as Harold was about to shut down his computer for the night, the low hum of the garage finally settling into quiet after a full day of tinkering and emails. The screen showed an unfamiliar number but with the area code of the small town where his son Ben lived. Harold hesitated, thumb hovering over the green button, then pressed it with a mix of hope and dread. Hello, he said, voice rough from disuse and surprise. Dad, it's me. Ben, the voice on the other end was unmistakable, deeper than Harold remembered but undeniably his son's. Hey, Ben, it's been a while, Harold said, swallowing a lump that had been growing since the summit, since the moment everything felt like it was finally changing. Yeah, Ben replied, hesitation thick in his tone, I saw your talk. The one in San Francisco. Harold's chest tightened. You did? Yeah, Ben said, I didn't think you'd want me to watch, but I did. And, Dad. I'm proud of you. Harold closed his eyes, blinked back something he hadn't let out in years. Thanks, son. That means a lot. Listen, Ben said, I've been thinking. About us. About everything. And maybe I've been wrong. I never really understood what you were trying to do, or why you kept digging into those old projects. But seeing you out there, showing up like that, it made me realize I was the one who walked away, not you. Harold felt a wave of guilt and relief crash through him all at once. Ben, I always wanted to fix things between us. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to keep us connected. Ben's voice cracked slightly. I know, Dad. Me too. But maybe it's not too late. Harold nodded even though Ben couldn't see him. Not too late, he echoed softly. What are you thinking? I want to come visit, Ben said. Maybe we can work on something together. Like you always said, start small. Build something. Harold's heart surged, a cocktail of fear and excitement. I'd like that, he said simply. I'd really like that. They talked for a while longer, the awkwardness of years spent apart folding into tentative plans, the wounds beginning to scab over with the salve of possibility. After the call ended, Harold sat in the dim light of the garage, staring at the tools scattered across the bench, and for the first time in a long time, the silence felt less like emptiness and more like space. Space to rebuild, to reconnect, to hope. He remembered the nights Ben stayed up late watching rocket launches with him, the messy kitchen counters covered in electronics and coffee cups, the scraped knees and shouted frustrations over botched circuits, and the endless questions that had made Harold realize that passion was contagious, and maybe Ben's silence had never been absence, just waiting for the right moment to speak again. The next days were a flurry of preparation and nervous excitement. Harold cleaned the guest room, dusted off old board games, and even attempted to learn some new software Ben might find useful. When Ben finally arrived, Harold opened the door with trembling hands, seeing his son standing there with a worn backpack, the familiar stubborn set to his jaw, but also something new, an openness, a readiness to build bridges and circuits both. They spent hours in the garage, fingers fumbling over wires and code, but also over conversations long overdue, the awkward silences slowly giving way to laughter and shared stories. Ben confessed he'd been working in tech, developing AI interfaces, and had felt stuck, overwhelmed by the rapid pace and endless competition. Harold listened, understanding the feeling all too well. "Maybe we're both just figuring out how to be relevant in a world that moves too fast," Harold said one evening, eyes bright under the garage's single hanging bulb. "Maybe relevance is about connection, not speed," Ben nodded, smiling for the first time in years without reservation. Together they sketched plans for a small AI-driven tool designed specifically for people like Harold, those who needed technology that was simple, accessible, and empowering, something that didn't replace human experience but enhanced it. They called it Bridge, a symbol of the gap they were trying to cross. Not just between generations but between fear and courage, between isolation and community. Over the next weeks, their collaboration deepened, blending Harold's decades of hands-on experience with Ben's technical savvy. They faced challenges and setbacks, code that wouldn't compile, circuits that shorted, frustration that bubbled, but each failure only pushed them closer, and slowly, Bridge took shape, a device that could listen, learn, and respond without judgment, designed to help older adults maintain independence while fostering connections to younger family members and communities. One evening, after a particularly tough day debugging, Ben looked at his father and said, "You know, Dad, this whole project, it's more than just tech. It's about trust. About believing someone's still there even when things get messy." Harold smiled. "That's what I've been trying to say all along." The breakthrough came quietly, late at night, when the device finally responded to a complex voice command correctly, lighting up in soft blue as if to say, "I'm here." They tested it with some of the Garage Summit participants remotely, receiving messages of encouragement and gratitude that made both men realize they were part of something bigger than themselves. One morning, as Harold sat sipping coffee on the porch, Ben beside him, he realized this wasn't just a personal victory but a shared one, proof that renewal could be sparked across divides, that healing was possible, and that the future could be built hand in hand. He remembered Elon's words from the summit, "Start small, build, persist," and how they'd never been just slogans but blueprints for this new chapter. Ben turned to him. "Dad, you're not just relevant. You're essential." Harold laughed, eyes misting. "Maybe I'm just catching up," he said, but really, he knew they were both exactly where they needed to be. The call from Ben was more than a reconnection. It was a bridge between past regrets and future hopes, between silence and conversation, and for Harold Jensen, it was the clearest signal yet that the story wasn't over, it was just beginning. The night after Ben's visit ended, Harold sat alone in the garage long after the lights were out in the house, the faint glow of his laptop screen illuminating the scattered parts and scribbled notes around him. He was tired in a way that only comes from days full of hope mixed with hard work, but instead of surrendering to sleep, he found himself staring at Elon Musk's words that had first lit the fire inside him. "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Those words echoed louder in the quiet than any applause had the night before, because now they weren't just theory or distant inspiration. They were a call to action, an urgent reminder that the future was waiting and that waiting was no longer an option. Harold pulled up the latest prototype files for Bridge, his fingers moving clumsily over the keyboard, remembering Ben's patient instructions, the balance between technology and simplicity, innovation and accessibility. Every line of code felt like a thread weaving a fragile connection between generations and dreams. The clock ticked past midnight, his mind racing with possibilities and obstacles. How many others like him were out there, trapped between wanting to contribute and feeling invisible? The answer pushed him forward, not as a burden but as fuel. He remembered the call he had gotten a few weeks earlier from Martha, the woman who ran the community center in Dayton, who'd reached out after watching his talk online. She wanted Bridge to help her members who were struggling with isolation and technology fatigue. Harold's heart had lifted at her request. Finally, the garage inventions and late nights might mean more than just personal redemption, they might become a lifeline. The following morning, sunlight spilled through the dusty windows, warming the cluttered space. Harold sipped his coffee, watching as a small beam of light caught the dust motes dancing in the air. a subtle reminder that even the smallest particles could carry illumination. He started drafting emails, setting up calls, making plans to pilot bridge with Martha's community center. The logistics were overwhelming at times, but he remembered Elon's relentless energy. The way he tackled problems by breaking them down into manageable pieces. Start small, Harold whispered to himself, start small. The days that followed were a blur of meetings and workshops. Harold found himself teaching older adults how to use the device, listening to their stories, their fears about being left behind in a world that seemed to move faster than their minds or bodies could keep up with. Each face reflected a version of his own struggles and hopes. He realized this project was never just about technology, it was about dignity, about reclaiming a voice when the world had tried to silence it. One afternoon, an older woman named Ruth told him, "I thought I was too old to learn something new. But this feels like someone finally made something for me." Harold felt a lump rise in his throat. "That's exactly why we built it," he said softly. The gratitude in her eyes made the endless nights and technical headaches worthwhile. Harold also began reaching out to others who had shared their stories during the Garage Summit. Many sent photos of their projects, their workshops, their quiet rebellions against the notion of too late. Their stories wove together like a tapestry of resilience and invention. He posted updates on the blog, watched as comments flooded in from people around the country, some still skeptical, others emboldened to try something new themselves. The momentum was growing in unexpected ways, but then came the moment every pioneer fears. The setback, the cold whisper of failure. The software suddenly stopped working, a glitch that erased days of work. Harold stared at the blank screen, feeling the weight of discouragement settle in. It was a moment where the old doubts threatened to reclaim their throne. Too late, too hard, too complicated. But then his phone buzzed, a text from Ben, "Remember why you started." Those simple words were a lifeline, a reminder that failure was just another step on the path. Harold rebooted, rewrote, redoubled his efforts, and slowly the system stabilized. The team cheered quietly around him through video calls. The spark that had seemed to flicker was roaring back to life. Months passed, and with each iteration, Bridge became more intuitive, more responsive, more a companion than a device. Harold began recording video diaries, sharing the human side of this journey, the late nights, the doubts, the breakthroughs. He knew this was part of the story that people needed to hear, the raw, unfiltered truth of change and persistence. Then came the moment that crystallized everything, an invitation to present Bridge at a National Innovation Conference, standing once again on a large stage. Harold felt a tremor of nerves but also a steady flame of purpose. He introduced the device not as a final product but as a symbol of what was possible when age, experience, and technology intersected with courage. He told the story of the Garage Summit, of Martha's Community Center, of Ben and the bridge they'd built between father and son, and the audience responded with standing ovations. Not just for the technology but for the message. It's never too late. That night, after the event, a message came through from Elon Musk's team, an invitation to discuss how Bridge might integrate with larger platforms to reach even more people. Harold's heart pounded as he realized the tiny spark he had lit in a Dayton garage was about to catch fire on a scale he'd only dreamed of, but more importantly, he knew that this was not about fame or fortune. It was about reclaiming the narrative of aging, about proving that relevance and innovation are ageless. Sitting back in his chair, Harold reflected on how far he had come, from feeling invisible to standing in the light, from doubt to determination, from silence to connection, and he understood at last what Elon had meant about the odds not mattering when the cause is important enough. The spark ignites in those who refuse to give up, Harold thought, smiling to himself, knowing that the story was far from over, and that the fire he had started would light the way for countless others waiting in the wings, waiting for permission to matter again. Despite the rising momentum around Bridge, Harold found himself sinking into a deep undercurrent of doubt that felt heavier than any technical glitch or late-night frustration. He was alone again in the garage one rainy evening, the hum of the heater struggling against the chill, the soft patter of raindrops on the windows like a metronome marking time he felt slipping away faster than ever. The headlines were no longer kind. Articles questioned if an old man with a makeshift invention could really disrupt a world ruled by young coders and billion-dollar startups. One tech blog mockingly called Bridge a nostalgic gimmick for retirees clinging to relevance. Harold read those words with a hollow ache, the sting worse because they echoed the secret fear gnawing inside him. Was he really just a relic grasping at shadows? He thought about Elon Musk, who had faced countless critics and skeptics but had pressed on relentlessly. Yet Elon was a younger man, a visionary with boundless energy and a team of thousands. Harold was one man, past 65, with creaking joints and a slowing mind. Could he keep up? Could Bridge keep up? He thought about Ben, about the conversations they'd shared, about how that small reconnection had given him fresh purpose. But even Ben had moments of frustration, confessing the impossibility of battling ageism and fast-moving tech culture simultaneously. Harold's phone buzzed repeatedly with emails, some from supporters, but others from investors pulling out or demanding unrealistic deadlines. The pressure was suffocating, the loneliness of leadership crushing. One night, sitting at his cluttered workbench, Harold stared at a half-finished circuit board and asked aloud, "Is this worth it? Am I chasing a dream that's already passed me by?" The question lingered like a dark cloud, until the soft ping of a new message distracted him. It was from an elderly woman named Alice who had been testing Bridge at Martha's Center. She wrote, "Thank you for giving me hope again. I thought I was invisible, but your invention made me feel seen." Tears welled in Harold's eyes. That simple message was a lifeline, a reminder that beneath the cynicism, there were lives touched and hearts reopened. Still, doubt crept in the cracks of progress. At the next team video call, a younger engineer gently asked, "Harold, do you really think this can compete with the big players? The ones with AI that can do everything?" Harold swallowed hard and replied, "It's not about competing. It's about connecting. We're building a bridge, not a barrier." But the words felt thin, even to his own ears. Days later, he found himself watching Elon Musk's interviews again, searching for the spark, the defiance that could lift him out of the pit. Elon spoke about first principles thinking, about stripping problems down to their core and rebuilding them with fresh eyes. Harold realized he had been letting doubt cloud his vision instead of focusing on why Bridge mattered. He started jotting down notes on why he began this journey, to give dignity back to people who felt forgotten, to create technology that empowered rather than overwhelmed, to prove that age was not a barrier but a reservoir of wisdom. Renewed by this clarity, Harold called Ben. "We need to double down on what makes Bridge special," he said. Ben agreed, suggesting a feature that allowed users to customize voice prompts with familiar tones, a way to add warmth to cold technology. They brainstormed late into the night, fusing experience with innovation. Harold also reached out to Martha and Alice, collecting feedback directly from those who mattered most. "Sometimes the biggest challenge," Martha said in a phone call, "is convincing people it's okay to ask for help." Harold realized that Bridge wasn't just a tool, it was a permission slip for a generation conditioned to be independent but starved for connection. Slowly, Harold began sharing the rawness of doubt on the blog, his fears, setbacks, and small victories. The response surprised him. Comments poured in from readers who felt seen in their struggles. Some wrote about their own battles with invisibility and ageism, others shared stories of late-life reinvention. Harold found a new community in the shared vulnerability, a tribe united not by age but by resilience. The weight of doubt didn't disappear overnight, but it shifted from a crushing burden to a reminder that meaningful change was messy and imperfect. One morning, a video call from a venture capitalist shocked Harold. The investor said, "I'm ready to fund Bridge, but only if you can guarantee scalability within 6 months." Harold hesitated, knowing that scaling quickly risked losing the human touch that made Bridge unique. He paused, then said, "Our priority isn't speed, it's impact. If that's a deal-breaker, I understand." The call ended without a clear answer, but Harold felt empowered by standing his ground. He wasn't willing to sacrifice Bridge's soul for rapid growth. In the silence afterward, he thought about Elon's risk-taking, not as reckless speed but as calculated persistence. Harold realized that sometimes the bravest thing was to say no, to protect what mattered most. The garage was his sanctuary where he rebuilt not just circuits but faith in purpose. One evening, after months of grappling with doubt, Harold sat down to record a new video diary. His voice was honest and steady. If you're listening and feeling like the world has passed you by, know this: you are not alone. Doubt is part of the journey, but it's not the destination. Keep building. Keep connecting. Because your story isn't finished until you say it is. He uploaded the video, feeling a calm resolve settle over him, the fire inside rekindled, tempered by the lessons of fear and uncertainty. As the rain tapped gently on the windowpanes, Harold smiled, ready to face whatever came next, knowing the weight of doubt was just another part of the climb towards something greater. The day Harold received the invitation to Elon Musk's private innovation retreat felt surreal, almost like a dream threading itself into his waking life. The letter had arrived in a simple envelope, no fanfare, just a brief message: "Your work on Bridge has captured our attention. Join us to explore the next frontier." For Harold, it was more than validation. It was a door opening into a world that had seemed reserved for others, the young, the powerful, the untouchable innovators. As he packed his modest suitcase, memories flooded back, the countless nights in this very garage, the hum of his tools, the ache in his joints, the quiet resolve to prove that age was not the enemy of change. He thought about Ben, who had become both collaborator and compass, the first person to see his ideas as more than nostalgia. The plane ride to the retreat was a blur of clouds and thoughts, each mile bringing anticipation and anxiety. Would he belong here? Could he stand alongside the tech giants and dreamers whose names lit up every headline? The retreat itself was set in a sprawling ranch in California, a place where nature and technology coexisted, solar panels gleaming under the sun, quiet spaces for reflection, labs buzzing with activity. Harold felt like a stranger entering a cathedral of possibility. Elon greeted him with the same quiet intensity Harold had seen in videos, sharp eyes, a restless energy that seemed to bend time. "Harold, it's good to meet you in person," Elon said, shaking his hand firmly. "I've been following your journey with Bridge. It's exactly the kind of innovation we need." The days that followed were a whirlwind of workshops, discussions, and brainstorming sessions with engineers, designers, and entrepreneurs from every corner of the world. Harold found himself pushed to think bigger, to question assumptions, to strip problems down to first principles just like Elon advocated. But more than that, he discovered that his perspective, shaped by years of life, loss, and reinvention, was valued. At one session, Elon challenged the group: "How do we create technology that doesn't just dazzle but truly empowers people? That's the frontier most overlook." Harold spoke up, sharing his vision of Bridge not as a gadget, but a companion for those who felt forgotten by the tech world. The room fell silent, then filled with nods. He realized that his age, once a source of insecurity, was now an asset, a wellspring of insight others lacked. One evening, under a sky splattered with stars, Elon and Harold sat by a fire pit. Elon shared stories of his own doubts and failures, how every success had been built on countless setbacks. "You're on the right path," Elon said. "The world needs your kind of stubbornness, the refusal to let age or fear dictate what's possible." Harold felt a surge of pride and resolve, knowing this was more than encouragement, it was a call to lead. Inspired by the retreat, Harold and Ben dove into a new phase of Bridge's development, integrating AI features designed to personalize the experience while maintaining the warmth that made it unique. They experimented with voice recognition that adapted to the user's mood, gentle reminders that encouraged rather than nagged, and a digital journal feature to capture memories and stories, a bridge between past and future. Back home, the community center pilot expanded, drawing media attention that framed Bridge as a symbol of late-life innovation. Harold was invited to speak on podcasts and panels, each time emphasizing the message that transformation was possible at any age. But the spotlight also brought new challenges. Critics questioned if Bridge could scale, if it was sustainable, if it was more than a feel-good story. Harold faced these doubts head-on, drawing strength from Elon's lessons and his own hard-won experience. One afternoon, Ben called with exciting news: a major tech company expressed interest in partnering to distribute Bridge nationally. Harold knew this was a crossroads moment. The offer promised resources and reach but risked diluting the personal touch that made Bridge special. After long talks with Ben and Martha, Harold decided to negotiate terms that preserved Bridge's mission and soul. The deal was struck with safeguards ensuring that the technology remained accessible and respectful of its users. As the first shipments of Bridge devices rolled out, Harold found himself overwhelmed with messages from users who were discovering newfound independence and connection. Stories poured in, a widow reconnecting with her grandchildren, a retired teacher sharing stories she'd forgotten, a veteran using the device to ease loneliness. Each message was a thread weaving a tapestry of hope and belonging. Reflecting on the journey, Harold understood that crossing this threshold was more than business success, it was a transformation of identity. He was no longer a man haunted by doubts and regrets but a pioneer lighting a path for others. The retreat with Elon had not only expanded his horizons but had reaffirmed the power of persistence and vision. One evening, as he sat in the quiet of his garage, Harold looked at the Bridge prototype glowing softly on the bench. He whispered, "We're just getting started." Outside, the stars blinked down like witnesses to a new chapter unfolding, a chapter written by those who refused to fade quietly, who chose instead to blaze their own trail regardless of age, because true innovation knows no boundaries, and the spark ignited in one life can illuminate the world. Just when Harold thought the path forward was clear, the unexpected arrived like a storm out of nowhere, threatening to undo everything he had built with such care and persistence. It started with a single email flagged urgent from the legal team representing a large tech corporation that had recently launched a product eerily similar to Bridge. The message accused Harold's team of patent infringement and warned of a costly lawsuit if they didn't cease operations immediately. The news hit Harold like a punch to the gut. After years of struggling to bring Bridge to life, after late nights, doubt, and breakthroughs, the prospect of a legal battle over intellectual property was crushing. The company's device was sleek and backed by a team with deep pockets and a reputation for aggressive defense. Harold felt the familiar wave of doubt creep back, whispering that maybe this was a sign it was time to quit, that no matter how hard he tried, the world wasn't ready to make space for an old man's invention. But as he sat in the quiet of his garage, the weight of the moment pressing on his chest, Harold remembered something Elon Musk had once said in an interview: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." That phrase had pulled him through before, and now it sparked a fire inside. He gathered Ben and the core team for a meeting the very next morning. "This isn't just a legal fight," Harold said, voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "It's about protecting the people who need Bridge most. We have to stand firm." Ben nodded, his own face lined with worry but resolute. They quickly contacted a trusted attorney, one with experience in tech and startup law, who assured them they had a strong case but warned that litigation would be lengthy and expensive. The news spread quietly through their community of users and supporters, many sending messages of encouragement, but Harold sensed the growing pressure from all sides: financial, emotional, and physical. For weeks, the team worked double time, preparing documents, gathering evidence, and refining Bridge's technology to highlight its unique features and innovations. The days grew longer and more exhausting, Harold's hands trembling sometimes as he balanced the demands of development and legal battles. Sleep was elusive, every phone ring or email ping jolted him with anxiety. Martha's community center felt like a lifeline, a place where Harold could remind himself why the fight mattered, not for profits or prestige, but for connection and dignity. Yet even in the darkest moments, Harold found unexpected strength. The users who had found hope in Bridge shared stories that fueled his resolve: a man who used it to keep his memory sharp, a woman who reconnected with family through its journaling feature. Those stories were more than testimonials, they were lifelines for Harold's spirit. One afternoon, during a rare break, Harold sat down with Ben to review user feedback. A comment caught his eye from a woman named Linda: "Bridge gave me a voice when I thought I'd lost it forever." Harold read it aloud, feeling the words anchor him against the swirling storm. The legal battle dragged on, punctuated by moments of frustration and faint hope. The opposition's lawyers pushed hard, aiming to intimidate, but Harold's team held their ground. They leaned on Elon's mindset, relentless persistence fueled by a sense of mission. Slowly, word of the lawsuit reached media outlets, and public opinion began to shift in Harold's favor. Articles appeared framing the story as a David versus Goliath battle, highlighting the human impact of Bridge and the courage of its creator. Support poured in from unexpected corners: tech leaders, advocates for aging populations, even some former skeptics. The narrative transformed from a legal fight into a symbol of resilience and the right to innovation regardless of age. Harold began appearing on podcasts and local news segments, using the platform to share not just the legal struggle but the deeper purpose behind Bridge. His message was clear: this fight wasn't about technology alone, it was about dignity, respect, and proving that no one was too old to make a difference. The community rallied around him, organizing fundraisers and social media campaigns that trended nationwide. Harold was overwhelmed by the outpouring, realizing he wasn't alone in this fight, that a movement was forming, fueled by people who refused to accept invisibility as a final chapter. During one pivotal court hearing, the judge asked Harold directly, "What makes Bridge different from other devices on the market?" Harold stood firm, describing the user-centered design, the emotional intelligence integrated into the AI, and the mission to empower an overlooked generation. He spoke with quiet passion, reminding everyone that innovation wasn't just about gadgets, it was about changing lives. The judge's thoughtful nod felt like a small victory, a crack in the armor of doubt. Months passed, and finally, a settlement was reached. Bridge would remain in production, with some licensing agreements that respected both parties but allowed Harold's vision to continue unhindered. The relief was immense but tempered by the knowledge that the fight had taken a toll. Harold was physically drained, but emotionally stronger than ever. He had faced down a giant and emerged with his purpose intact. Reflecting on the journey, Harold realized the challenge had been a crucible, testing not only his invention but his courage and conviction. The storm had forced him to dig deeper, to lean into the community he had built, and to embrace the idea that true innovation required more than invention, it demanded resilience. As he looked around his garage, filled with the familiar tools and glowing screens, Harold felt a renewed sense of possibility. The fight wasn't over, but neither was he. And in that moment, he knew that the unexpected challenge had become a defining chapter, a testament to the power of persistence and the unyielding spirit that refuses to fade quietly with age. After the storm of the legal battle had passed, leaving behind a fragile but intact Bridge, Harold felt a quiet shift in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something new to unfold. The challenge had tested every fiber of his being, pushing him to places he hadn't imagined he'd go at this stage in life. But with the dust settling, a new energy pulsed beneath the surface, a chance not just to survive but to truly thrive. Harold returned to his garage with a sense of renewed purpose, though the exhaustion lingered like a shadow. He knew that surviving the fight wasn't enough, now it was time to prove that Bridge could change lives on a scale that mattered. The community center remained the heart of this mission, a living laboratory where Harold and his team continued to listen deeply to the needs of their users. One morning, as the sun spilled gold across the faded linoleum floors, Martha approached Harold with a question that cut through the noise. "What's next, Harold? How do we make sure this doesn't just stay a small success?" Her eyes were steady, reflecting the hopes of so many who relied on Bridge. Harold paused, feeling the weight of her trust. "We grow," he said simply, "but we grow with care. We have to stay true to what made Bridge special, the connection, the dignity, the humanity." That clarity became a guiding star. Harold and Ben strategized on expanding the team, bringing in younger engineers who respected the original vision, blending fresh ideas with lived wisdom. They focused on accessibility, making the device more intuitive, affordable, and adaptable to a wider range of users with varying abilities. But beyond the tech, Harold recognized something even more important: the stories behind each user. He began to record these stories, simple moments of rediscovery, connection, and joy, turning them into a series of short films shared online. The response was electric. People saw themselves in those stories and felt a spark of hope. One story stood out, that of Gloria, an 82-year-old widow who used bridge to reconnect with her estranged son after decades of silence. Her tear-filled reunion video went viral, a testament to the power of technology married with heart. Harold realized that these stories were the true soul of bridge, the living proof that transformation was possible. Media outlets picked up the narrative, framing bridge not just as a device but as a movement redefining aging and technology. Invitations poured in for Harold to speak at conferences, universities, and community events, each appearance amplifying the message that innovation belonged to everyone, regardless of age. Amid the growing attention, Harold remained grounded. He spent mornings walking the quiet neighborhood streets, the crisp air filling his lungs, reminding himself why he had started this journey, not for fame or fortune, but for the faces behind the screens. One day, as he returned from a walk, his phone buzzed with a video call from Elon Musk himself. "Harold," Elon said with his characteristic blend of intensity and warmth, "you've crossed an important threshold. What you're building isn't just technology, it's a new way of thinking about purpose and potential. Keep pushing." The call was brief but left Harold energized, a torch passed from one visionary to another. Back at the community center, Harold gathered the team to share the news. The room buzzed with excitement, but also a renewed commitment to the mission. They began planning a nationwide rollout, partnering with healthcare providers and senior organizations to bring bridge to more people. The scale was daunting, but Harold embraced the challenge with the same stubbornness that had carried him through every trial. The turning point wasn't just about external success, it was about Harold's own transformation. He found himself less burdened by the past regrets that had once weighed him down and more focused on the present possibilities. His relationships with Ben, Martha, and even his estranged daughter Sarah, who had slowly re-entered his life, began to heal and deepen. One afternoon, Harold sat quietly in the community center's garden, watching a group of seniors using bridge to share memories and laughter. The sound was a balm, a reminder that technology, when wielded with care, could create not just efficiency but empathy. In that moment, Harold whispered to himself, "This is why we fight. This is why we create." The turning point was no longer a distant hope but a lived reality, a testament to the power of resilience, connection, and the belief that it's never too late to change the world. As bridge began to reach new corners of the country, Harold watched in quiet awe as the ripple effect of his work spread far beyond anything he had imagined. What started as a modest project in a cluttered garage had become a beacon for those who believed that age was no barrier to innovation or connection. The early morning light filtered through the window of the community center as Harold prepared for a video call with a group of new users in a small town miles from the bustling cities where tech usually thrived. Their voices came through, a patchwork of accents and stories, each one carrying the unmistakable undercurrent of hope. Harold listened carefully as they described how bridge had transformed their days, not just by easing tasks, but by restoring a sense of independence and belonging. One woman, Joyce, spoke with a tremor of emotion about how bridge helped her keep track of her medications and connected her with neighbors she had long lost touch with. "It's like having a friend who never forgets," she said. That phrase stayed with Harold, a reminder that technology's greatest gift was its ability to nurture human connection. As the weeks rolled on, Harold and his team expanded the bridge network, working with healthcare providers to integrate the device into senior care programs. Hospitals reported fewer readmissions as patients managed their health more proactively, families found peace of mind knowing their loved ones were supported, and community centers became hubs of activity where bridge was more than a device, it was a catalyst for renewed life. Social media buzzed with testimonials, videos, and stories shared by users and their families. Harold's own inbox filled with messages from people he would never meet, each one a thread in the growing tapestry of impact. One letter arrived from a veteran named Carl, who shared how bridge helped him overcome isolation after the loss of his wife. "You gave me back my voice," Carl wrote. The simplicity and power of those words hit Harold hard, fueling his determination to push forward despite the inevitable challenges. Yet as the ripple grew, so did the complexities. Scaling bridge meant navigating the labyrinth of manufacturing, customer service, and technical support, all areas where Harold's team had little experience. They faced supply chain delays, software bugs, and the pressure of meeting growing expectations. Some users struggled with adapting to the technology, reminding Harold that innovation required patience and empathy as much as invention. During one particularly difficult week, Harold found himself overwhelmed, the weight of responsibility pressing down like never before. In those moments, he turned again to Elon Musk's mindset, embracing failure as a stepping stone, not a stopping point. He gathered the team for a candid conversation, reminding everyone that setbacks were part of the journey. "Our mission is bigger than any obstacle," Harold said. "We're not just building a device, we're building a movement." The team rallied, doubling down on user training and support, refining the interface, and creating new resources to ease adoption. Slowly, the tide began to turn. More users found their footing, their stories flooding in with renewed enthusiasm. At a national conference on aging and technology, Harold took the stage to speak not just about Bridge, but about the larger vision it represented, a world where innovation embraced all generations, where the wisdom of years met the energy of new ideas. His speech resonated deeply, sparking conversations and partnerships that extended Bridge's reach into underserved communities. After the event, a young engineer approached Harold, inspired by the story and eager to contribute. The meeting sparked fresh ideas and collaborations, reminding Harold that the ripple effect was also about building bridges between generations, merging experience with youthful creativity. At home, Harold's relationships blossomed in tandem with his work. His daughter Sarah, once distant and skeptical, now visited regularly, curious about the project and proud of the man her father had become. Together, they brainstormed ways to make Bridge more accessible to tech-weary seniors, blending Sarah's digital savvy with Harold's lived wisdom. One evening, as they reviewed user feedback, Sarah paused and said, "Dad, you're not just changing lives. You're changing the way we all think about aging." The words stirred something deep within Harold, a profound sense of legacy and belonging. The ripple effect extended beyond users and families, it reached communities, cultures, and perceptions. Slowly but surely, the narrative around aging began to shift. No longer was it a story of decline and invisibility but one of possibility, resilience, and contribution. Harold felt privileged to be part of this transformation, knowing it was far from finished. In the quiet moments, he reflected on how far he had come, from a man burdened by regret and doubt to a leader igniting change. The journey had been anything but easy, but every step had been worth it. Outside the window, the evening sky blazed with the colors of sunset, a reminder that endings often made way for new beginnings. Harold smiled, feeling the steady pulse of the ripple effect spreading outward, carrying with it the promise of a future where age was no longer a barrier but a bridge to endless possibility. As Bridge's influence expanded, Harold found himself standing at the edge of a new horizon, a place where possibility stretched wider than he had ever dared to imagine. The project had moved beyond a simple assistive device, it was becoming a catalyst for societal change, challenging long-held beliefs about aging, capability, and purpose. The dawn light streamed into his study, illuminating blueprints and sketches scattered across the desk. Harold traced his fingers over the plans for Bridge 2.0, a more advanced, adaptable system integrating AI not just to assist but to inspire. The new version aimed to learn users' habits, moods, and needs with greater sensitivity, helping not only with memory and tasks but also with emotional support. It was ambitious, maybe even audacious for a man who only a few years ago doubted his ability to innovate at all. Yet Harold's confidence had grown, fueled by the waves of encouragement from users, the unwavering dedication of his team, and that unshakable mindset he first glimpsed in Elon Musk's words. The past legal battles, the late nights, the setbacks, they all led to this moment of possibility. The community center buzzed with activity as volunteers tested early prototypes of Bridge 2.0, sharing feedback and ideas. Harold cherished these moments, the hum of collaboration, the spark of creativity, the smiles of those who felt seen and valued. One afternoon, Martha brought a group of seniors to demo the new device. Their reactions were more than positive, they were transformative. Harold watched as an elderly woman named Ruth tentatively tried the voice assistant, then burst into laughter when it cracked a joke perfectly timed to her dry wit. It was a simple moment, but for Harold, it symbolized everything Bridge stood for: connection, joy, and reclaiming agency. The next big challenge was securing funding to scale the project nationally and internationally. Investors were intrigued but cautious. They questioned the market size and the return on investment for technology aimed at older adults. Harold faced these meetings with the humility and passion of someone who knew his mission was about more than profit. He shared stories of Bridge users whose lives had been transformed, emphasizing the untapped potential in a demographic often overlooked by Silicon Valley. Slowly, attitudes shifted. A few key investors came on board, not just for financial gain but because they believed in the vision. This validation was a turning point, opening doors that had seemed firmly shut. With new resources, Harold expanded the team, bringing in experts in AI ethics, gerontology, and design thinking. The collaboration enriched Bridge 2.0, ensuring it was both cutting-edge and deeply humane. Harold insisted on regular user panels, where seniors voiced concerns, offered insights, and helped shape every feature. This user-centered approach became a hallmark of the project, setting it apart from impersonal tech giants. As Bridge prepared for a broader launch, Harold reflected on the transformation he had undergone. He was no longer the hesitant inventor doubting his worth. He was a leader inspiring change, a man who had learned to embrace uncertainty and channel fear into fuel. His relationship with Sarah had blossomed into a partnership, bridging generational divides with mutual respect and shared purpose. Together, they dreamed bigger than ever before, envisioning a future where technology and humanity intertwine seamlessly to enhance life at every stage. One evening, after a long day of meetings and brainstorming, Harold sat quietly on his porch, gazing at the horizon painted with twilight hues. The cool breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine, a reminder of life's cycles and renewal. He thought back to the darkest days, the moments when quitting seemed inevitable. Those memories no longer held power over him, they were part of the journey, a testament to resilience. The horizon before him was not just a metaphor but a promise, of new discoveries, new connections, and a future where aging was not a decline but a new frontier. He whispered a thank you to the quiet night, to the spark of inspiration from a man named Elon Musk, and to the countless faces who had joined him on this path. The new horizon was wide open, and Harold was ready to step boldly into it. Even as the new horizon stretched wide before Harold, there came a moment, as inevitable as nightfall, when doubt crept in with a whisper sharp and cold. The excitement and momentum of Bridge 2.0's development collided with a harsh reality. Progress was slow, funding was tighter than expected, and the pressures mounted from every direction. It was one thing to dream big and quite another to face the grind of execution, the delays in production, the glitches in the AI, the constant balancing act between innovation and accessibility. Harold sat in his quiet study, staring at the glowing screen filled with error reports and budget forecasts. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. Was he fooling himself? Was he, at 68, out of his depth in a world dominated by younger minds with faster fingers and sharper algorithms? The thought gnawed at him. His body ached more these days, sleep was elusive, and the late nights at the computer took a toll on his spirit. The once unshakable confidence now felt fragile, fractured by the relentless demands. His daughter Sarah noticed the change. "Dad," she said gently during a video call, "it's okay to feel overwhelmed. You're carrying a lot. But remember why you started." Her voice was steady, a lifeline across the miles. Harold nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The truth was, the path ahead was uncertain, and the stakes felt higher than ever. Compounding the strain was a growing skepticism from some in the aging community who questioned whether new technology was truly the answer. A few outspoken voices argued that relying on AI risked further isolation, replacing human interaction with cold machines. Harold understood the fear, he had wrestled with it himself, but he believed Bridge could be different. It was meant to complement, not replace, the human touch. To confront these doubts, Harold organized a roundtable at the community center, inviting users, caregivers, experts, and critics alike. The conversation was raw and real. One participant, a retired nurse named Helen, voiced concern that technology might make families complacent, assuming the device could substitute for visits and emotional support. Another, a younger caregiver, shared how Bridge had helped her mother regain confidence and independence. Harold listened carefully, feeling the weight of responsibility deepen. The discussion reinforced his commitment to transparency and continuous improvement, reminding him that no innovation was perfect and that the human element must always remain front and center. Despite the growing complexity, Harold leaned into the mindset he'd cultivated, that setbacks were opportunities in disguise. He reminded himself of Elon Musk's words, "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." It was a mantra that had carried him through past storms and would have to do so again. With renewed resolve, Harold pushed the team to double down on user education and community building efforts. They created workshops, support groups, and interactive tutorials to ease fears and build trust. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The skeptics softened as they saw the tangible benefits Bridge offered, and the community grew stronger, more connected. Yet, in the quiet moments, Harold battled his own shadows. He questioned whether the sacrifices were worth it, the missed family dinners, the frayed friendships, the toll on his health. One night, as he sat alone in the dim light of his garage, he allowed himself to feel the weight fully. Tears came unbidden, a release of years of pent-up frustration and fear. But even in that vulnerability, he found a spark, a stubborn ember refusing to die. The crossroads of doubt was not a dead end but a fork in the road. Harold chose to keep moving forward, embracing imperfection, accepting help, and leaning on the community that had grown around Bridge. He realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the choice to act despite it. The journey was far from over, but Harold's spirit remained unbroken, fueled by the quiet belief that meaningful change required endurance, empathy, and unwavering hope. After weeks of wrestling with doubt and navigating the tangled web of challenges, Harold found himself standing on the brink of something profound, a breakthrough that promised to transform not only Bridge but the lives it touched in ways he had long dreamed of. The journey had been grueling. Late nights blurred into early mornings, the hum of computers and the quiet tapping of keyboards filling the air. The team had worked tirelessly to refine Bridge 2.0's AI, training it to understand not just commands but emotions, moods, and subtle changes in behavior. This was the leap from assistance to empathy, from technology to companion. One evening, as Harold reviewed the latest user data, a notification popped up, an alert from the AI system identifying a pattern of withdrawal in a user named Linda, an 80-year-old widow living alone in rural Ohio. The AI had suggested a gentle nudge, a message encouraging Linda to reconnect with her book club, something she had stopped attending months ago. Harold was struck by the system's ability not just to respond but to anticipate needs, to foster real human connection. The very next day, Linda called Bridge's support line, her voice trembling but hopeful. "I got the message," she said. "It was like someone remembered me." Her story spread quickly among the team, igniting a wave of enthusiasm and renewed purpose. Encouraged by these results, Harold expanded the system's emotional intelligence features, adding personalized prompts, mood-based music playlists, and even a memory lane mode, where users could revisit cherished moments through photos and recordings curated by the AI. The impact was immediate and deeply moving. Videos surfaced online showing seniors laughing with Bridge's playful banter or shedding tears recalling long-forgotten memories. The device was no longer a tool but a companion, a bridge to the past and a guide toward renewed engagement with life. The breakthrough caught the attention of major news outlets, sparking conversations across the country about the role of AI in human well-being. Harold was invited to share his vision on national television, where he spoke with heartfelt conviction about aging not as decline but as a phase ripe with opportunity for growth and connection. During one interview, he referenced Elon Musk, saying, "It's about pushing beyond what we think is possible, refusing to accept limitations, and believing in the potential for change at any age. The response was overwhelming. Emails poured in from seniors and caregivers, sharing stories of transformation and gratitude. For Harold, these messages were more than validation, they were fuel for the soul. The breakthrough also brought unexpected moments of joy and reconciliation. His daughter Sarah, inspired by the project's success, joined the team full-time, bringing fresh energy and expertise. Together, they envisioned expanding Bridge's reach globally, tailoring it to diverse cultures and languages. The family bond, once strained and distant, was mended through shared purpose. Yet, amid the celebrations, Harold remained humble, knowing the journey was ongoing. The breakthrough was not an endpoint but a new beginning. There were still barriers to overcome: funding, accessibility, and the ever-present skepticism about technology's role in our lives. But Harold was undeterred. He had seen firsthand how belief, persistence, and empathy could move mountains. Late one night, as the city lights flickered beyond his window, Harold sat quietly, reflecting on the path that had brought him here. From the early days of isolation and doubt to this moment of light and connection, the transformation was profound. He felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the users who trusted Bridge, the team who never gave up, and the spark of inspiration from a visionary who had dared to challenge the impossible. The breakthrough was a testament to the power of resilience, innovation, and the human spirit. As dawn approached, Harold whispered a promise to himself and to those he served: this is just the beginning. The morning sun poured softly through the windows of Harold's home, casting long shadows that danced gently on the worn wooden floor. It was a quiet moment, one of many Harold now cherished deeply, a stark contrast to the storms he had weathered over the years. Sitting by the window with a cup of coffee warming his hands, Harold reflected on the journey that had led him here, from a place of doubt and despair to a future bursting with promise. The Bridge project had evolved far beyond a simple assistive technology. It had become a movement, a lifeline, and a testament to the unyielding power of hope and human connection. Harold remembered the moment when Elon Musk's words first sparked a fire inside him, the radical idea that limitations, whether age or circumstance, were often self-imposed barriers ready to be shattered. He had taken that spark and fanned it into a blaze, transforming his own life and the lives of countless others along the way. The new legacy was not about personal accolades or recognition. It was about the ripple effects, the restored friendships, the rekindled dreams, the renewed sense of purpose that radiated from every user whose life Bridge touched. Harold's phone buzzed gently on the table, a message from Sarah. "Morning, Dad. Just wanted to say I'm proud of everything you've done. Let's catch up later." Harold smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. The bond between father and daughter was stronger than ever, built on shared vision and mutual respect. The house, once a symbol of solitude, was now a hub of laughter and conversation. Harold's mornings often began with visits from neighbors eager to share their latest Bridge stories or offer feedback on new features. The community he had once feared was slipping away had grown vibrant and connected. As he prepared for the day's activities, Harold felt a profound sense of peace. The fear that had once gnawed at him. The fear of being irrelevant, forgotten, too old to matter, had dissolved into a quiet confidence rooted in purpose. He was not merely surviving the passage of time, he was shaping it. His legacy was being written not in stone but in lives touched, in hearts healed, in futures ignited. Later that afternoon, Harold joined a gathering at the community center, where seniors and volunteers celebrated the latest milestone, Bridge's expansion into underserved rural areas. The room buzzed with energy, stories flowing freely like a river of shared experience. One man, George, shared how Bridge had helped him reconnect with his estranged daughter after decades of silence. Another woman, Ethel, spoke about how the device gave her the courage to start painting again, rediscovering a long-lost passion. Harold listened, eyes glistening with unshed tears, humbled by the profound impact. As the event wound down, Harold took a moment to speak to the crowd. His voice steady and warm, he said, "I once believed my story was over, that I was too old to change. But I learned that every day offers a new beginning. Age is not a cage but a key. We have the power to rewrite our narratives, to embrace possibility, and to inspire those who come after us. The room erupted in applause, a chorus of affirmation that echoed far beyond the walls. That night, alone in his study, Harold penned a letter to the future, a message to anyone who might one day feel lost or forgotten. He wrote, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again. If you're reading this, know that your time is now. You are the author of your own legacy." As he set down the pen, Harold felt a quiet fulfillment settle over him. The new legacy was not a finish line but an ongoing journey, a beacon of hope lighting the way for generations to come. The moment it all changed was not in some distant future but in the choice to believe, to act, and to never stop dreaming. And with that, Harold looked out into the night sky, stars twinkling like promises, ready to face whatever new horizons awaited. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?